Yeah, no.
So what struck you about the conference so far? What do you want to know about what we're doing and what we're seeing? What's exciting about AI to you in this moment compared to 6 months ago? Very curious.
Yeah. So for me, once we get into this, basically, I just want to talk a little bit about Inflection. What is you care? So, they own their edge. You train it. They own it. Basically, that kind of thing. It is kind of interesting, the whole idea of EQ with AI and how that is. I don't know, the conference so far, it's just been it's only been a day or whatever, so there hasn't been a lot. I do wonder, with the whole AI thing, it hit me, I guess it was last night with the guy who was poo-pooing AI, who just shit. Did you watch that? That's awesome.
I mean, you got to have that, right, as the opening.
I just thought that was fucking, no, to be the opening, keynote, to be wow, they're doing that, okay. But I think the interesting thing for me, having been in tech for so long, and not really followed, because nobody fucking followed AI until 2 years ago, but my question is when did a LLM become AI?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Because it's we've had computer vision and we've had voice analysis.
Right. ML.
There are all kinds of, for years. And even however you feel about fucking Tesla, you've had Tesla for a decade. But then all of a sudden ChatGPT comes out and now we're talking about AGI. And you're like...
Do you think that's because it uses this tech we're using right now, that it uses language?
Yeah.
Whereas a recommendation engine or computer vision, to your point, you get to experience the output, but it's not as close to home in a sense as this oldest tech we have, which is words.
Yeah.
And so it's wait, what? And also because of the whole legacy of the Turing test for all of its problems of when it can trick you.
Yeah.
Which really, that's the bar? How did that get to be the bar? No disrespect at all to Turing the Great. But yeah, I mean, I've somebody who's been playing with products that depended on ML for the last couple decades.
Yeah.
They wait, why are we calling this AI?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and it's well, at some point the market decides what it is, and then it's it's AGI, and you're well, no, not yet. And also, when does that get declared? I think even Amazon has a team called the AGI team, and you're really?
Yeah.
How would you feel if you're working on the non-AGI AGI? You of all people know how one, if you can get a simple one-liner or phrase that caricatures, that moves or floats, then it gets picked up. I mean, all these people who were building really valuable assistants 6 months ago had to rebrand them. They're agents. And who knows whether agents will remain the term 18 months from now, or whether all these MCP servers that are, letting data go in and out, and you're hoping that the majority of the value is accruing to the workflows that you enable instead of losing. Somebody vastly smarter than me, Diego, the chief product officer over at Box, has this line that MCP is the new soap. If you remember that protocol from back when, right, exactly, right. And obviously that's true, with the difference that soap had nowhere near the hype. Because of AI that MCP is, where all apps in the enterprise, by the end of this year, of course, they're going to also have MCP servers, which changes the workflow and changes how you price them, and it's all up for grabs. Not in a totally chaotic way, but it means that it's not that area is untouched. And that's maybe part of why it's called AI, is AI went from being it's pure magic and can do anything, and it's well, not quite yet. Right? Still actually needs to have computing systems that generate the stuff out. Some of it's still super expensive. Some of it's nice and narrow. And then to your point about EQ, which obviously I could talk about for 6 hours without coming up for breath. It's worth mentioning that when Reed and Mustafa and Karen and the V1 team started Inflection, part of the whole idea was okay, so at this dawn of the AI era, what is the kind of thing that you wouldn't expect AI to be able to do? To speak with higher emotional, astuteness than myself is probably not that hard, but for very emotionally astute people, that seems something so human that, to your point, seeing a machine generate text that is in a dialogue, a multi-turn, let's say the median is in the high dozens, not 2 or 3 back and forth, in a way that feels to the person engaging. Okay, so How is that possible? Well, one, you get lots of humans, you put them on payroll, and you get them to generate high quality data. You synthesize data based on that you also then use to train a giant model. The one, we've talked about this publicly, but the sort of the flagship and production model. We have a larger model that we use in all sorts of ways to help train smaller ones and do a bunch of other stuff, but like the 353 billion parameter model that powers Pi, which you've used and lots of people out there have used, that we leave live as a public benefit and also kind of as a calling card of the kind of thing that can be done, precisely because you can't really do broad-based general dialogue with a small model. What you can do with a small model is all these very specific, targeted, highly focused tasks, and there are some great companies out there. I was on a panel with May from Writer, David from IBM. They're all doing great work with smaller models that power agents to create real value. But the whole point is across the whole range, from small to large, purely instrumental to more emotionally astute. One of the things we focus a lot on is how do you deploy these emotionally astute models to start changing the value curve for your customer experiences or even inside the workplace. And I put it in that order because a lot of our work inside the enterprise is either generalized inference, like Intel was one of the earliest to put it on-prem, like physically on-prem, or in a virtual private cloud for general purposes. Others, we spend a lot of time doing structured data and how that interacts with AI. So one of the companies we bought called Boost KPI, that's their expertise, is like anomaly detection across giant, and multiple sources of data, so that you can find ways to, if you will, create positive inflections as well as preventing negative ones. The jokes write themselves.
I like you throw inflection in.
I mean, I can't help it. Right? It's the greatest brand to have inherited ever. Emotion doesn't play into that yet, but part of the reason we do that is, one, it's a way as an on-ramp for those whose job it is to use the company's data to create more value. And once you're doing that, then you also have an entree to figuring out how can the high EQ stuff also create levers for you, especially if you're running a customer experience set of experiences.
So I guess I'm just going to have to figure this out. We just started talking. So I'll figure out how to chop the video up. Anyway, so we're here. So let's just go with it.
Are.
So, so you're talking about the EQ, and you're talking about so you look at the systems. And so again, like if you look at LLMs, I would argue these are just natural language processing systems, and there's mathematical. And so you create AI. So when you start talking about EQ, is that a completely different subsystem, or is this somehow you've trained your? I don't believe, but have you trained it to be emotionally intelligent or something?
Thank you for the alley-oop. so we'll come back to the difference between NLP and these very large LLMs. Because to your point, there's a lot that's similar. But there are subtle differences in terms of both the scale these operate on, the methodologies. But to your point about training, that's exactly correct. As you know, but for the benefit probably of your viewers, which is, we have a proprietary data set that was created by, lots of people on payroll in the United States who created a multi-million data set of this is the kind of training set to make a language machine be emotionally aware. A very high dimensional mapping, if you will, like think of the number of dimensions about, is my remark, courteous? Is it, boring? Is it slightly courteous? Is it passive aggressive? Like we have a mapping for the outputs of the LLM in order to map it. And then we synthesized an order of magnitude more data, and then used all that to train the uniqueness of the flagship model that's powering Pi.ai and the Pi apps that are out there publicly for free. And it's exactly what you said, which is the purpose of that initially was just as part of a, let's show what AI can do. The original team was like, and then once we figure that out, we'll figure out how to make a business out of it. And then Microsoft came knocking and invited Mustafa to be the first CEO of the AI division of Microsoft. And most of the original team, offer they couldn't really resist, to use the reach and the vision Microsoft in the Satya era with Kevin Scott as the CTO, our old CTO at LinkedIn, like just unbelievable opportunity. And so we rebuilt the team focused on commercial plays, both within the enterprise and how the enterprises meet their customers there. So you haven't heard a lot about how we use the EQ because a year ago, everybody was trying to use AI to make their processes go faster inside or to write text. Think of banks that use very large language models, whether us or OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini. Llama, of course, wasn't even really on the scene this time last year at the large scale. 405B came out, in October. To make sure that none of the emails that go out put them in trouble from a compliance standpoint. Now, happily, what you're seeing is companies are they're starting to use agents to remove a lot of the wasted time, honestly, that people like us actually do. Think of the salesperson who, they've done the meeting. Why do they have to go manually update Salesforce? Have an agent do that. Just the hops between the different tools that you have at work, that's wasted work. That's not about automating away the humans. That's about automating away the stuff that is wasted work for the humans because of the tools. Right? Remove that cruft, unblock the workflow you already know how to do, but then also use AI to unlock new opportunities. And that's where, as you know, is called fine-tuning or post-training of these models, much like we did with EQ, but for more targeted sets. So imagine we spend a lot of time fine-tuning some of these open source models, not just our own. So we spent a lot of time with Llama 3.5 and 4, the 70 billion parameter model. Llama 3.5 70 it's a beautiful model. Honestly, it's at this Pareto optimal point between cost of running it. It's open, obviously, and just power. So we're, I think, if not one of the 2 or 3 most prolific contributors to the open source TorchTune product. So the what's called the GRPO capabilities, which was innovation on fine-tuning invented by the DeepSeek people that we studied and then contributed back to the open source community so that everybody can benefit from this. You're seeing this moment where, as usual, open source is a really important complement, even for those of us with closed models. So we're very much a both and in ways that what I think of as the 5 sort of super models, OpenAI, obviously Microsoft, Gemini, Grok, Llama, and Anthropic, and then all the Chinese models, they kind of choose not to be. Whereas all of us who are trying to provide real value for the enterprise, we're like, let's mix and match. There's a whole range of things to solve the problems at hand for you. We play pretty deep in the stack because of what we come from. We're not like a bunch of apps that use for very targeted point solutions. Valuable as they are, that's just not where we play. We play very deep because of where we come from.
So curious. So going back to EQ. Go back about that. So is EQ simply fine-tuning a model that's been created, or is it actually the model itself?
I love this question. We didn't plan this beforehand, really.
We just started.
Well, no, here's what I've heard. So EQ is about speaking nicely. No, sometimes. But it's about being aware of the emotional valence or relevance or feeling of the words. So wait, when we talk about this, because words matter, and this is what words really matter.
What fucking pisses me off about AI is people start playing with words. It's like it's not that. That's a word. Right. So when you say aware, is it pinging a database to say, is this good word, or is this simply statistical analysis of? Well,
so you mentioned NLP before. And of course, one of the things that I have seen, so there's this brilliant guy who works at, he built a bunch of NLP stuff at Intel, who's a partner that's publicly, this guy is Saf. And in conversations with him about an assistant they had built around using NLP versus what our system is, it really highlighted for me how dramatically different this technology set based on Transformer with all of its hallucinations or imagination, if you will, is compared to a lot of the systems that NLP would output. So there's certainly a huge amount of probability involved. In fact, during the panel that Amy moderated of May, David and myself earlier today, one of the things I was talking about is how we only recently added this ability for you to say, look, this particular data needs to be unchanging or invariant all the way through the inference stack, so that, you know, if I don't know, the price of these sneakers is this, it doesn't randomly change because the AI is trying to invent something to impress you or make you feel better. Yeah. EQ is a bit different. We're still in the early days, honestly, in our view, of how does EQ, when it's a core component of these systems, you know more about NLP systems than I do, but I'm sure you remember that, like, you know, with NLP systems, there's like the intent tree, the rhetorical tree, but what happens if you also now have an emotional tree, right? Like, you know, my colleague Susan talks often about how inflection is not just what a graph does. It's also, if you think about that scene in Finding Nemo with the word dude, you know, where the turtles are like, dude. That's an inflected change in meaning for the same word. Okay, so now apply that to all words, in all languages, all combinations of them. How you feel is how do I put this? You'd think I'd have a zinger one-liner about this. Working on it. It is because the tech hasn't been there. Everybody knows emotion matters in customer experiences, but how to get there, other than through astute people who themselves have figured out how they do interviews, or like how they sell something, or how they make you feel better when you're complaining about a broken piece of the product, or how you're trying to decide, do I check out today or do I come back and add things to my cart later because I'm afraid maybe I forgot either the diapers or the beer, and that most common duple in grocery shopping. Emotion plays a role in all of your decision making that has been under modeled. Because it's hard. Like, even our system is with all of its, you know, high dimensional vectors, so to speak, of emotion, it's still early days. And so part of the explorations we do with external partners and on our own is how can plugging our capabilities in help you transform the way your tools transform your customers' experiences. So notice the common theme here is we're not trying to compete with the whole industry in a 360 way. That seems foolish. But instead, how do we plug in as a both and to the way people are doing what they're doing? And so, you know, in terms of EQ, I'll just give you another example, which is, so we spend a lot of time fine-tuning open source models, both to stay current, and we're able to see things that people doing fine-tuning who don't have giant models like we do typically don't see, because there's some really arcane and weird stuff that goes on in these models. Like, we were fine-tuning our 28 billion parameter model, and we changed the way it handled structured output, and then the only responses it would give you is structured output. We eventually figured out why and fixed that, but that's the kind of, like, that would never happen with a person. Do you know what I mean? If I suddenly start speaking to you in like double integrals or some bizarre, even more tachyon than this kind of is. So we tuned a version of the 70B Llama 4 Scout model for a well-known shoe manufacturer, just for fun, because a lot of us wear that particular brand, and we wanted to see, using our emotional data set and a bunch of synthetic data about that particular brand, how does it respond? And so Lee, who you'll probably have on the show a little bit later, you met earlier, convinced me to use this in a particular demo, because we put in the prompt, I just got cut from my high school basketball team. No emoji, no. And the response was, oh, don't feel bad. Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team. And of course, Michael Jordan is very famously associated with a particular brand, and so the fact of that speed and naturalness is the kind of thing about, that's an emotionally astute response that's also tuned for that particular brand. If you compare that model, which that's pretty cool, with our flagship model, it's just way more like astute and supportive and like just engages you. So it's one of those things that, unfortunately, it's like, I could show you all the graphs in the world to be like, look, it's more emotional than the other, but because it's emotion, you know it when you feel it.
But so here's an interesting place. So like, when you say that, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, so emotional always means being way too nice. Is your system emotional, or is it just polite?
Oh, great question. Right. It does not speak Southern right now, although you could tune it to be.
Well, no, if I start screaming at it, will it start screaming back? Or it'll be like, oh, this guy is
No,
so
but
good.
actually, to your point, like this is where, well, so you're raising all sorts of issues, right? So one, I mean, even bringing up Asheville, like, you know, Asheville up in the mountains might be different than Asheville down towards Hilton Head. Yeah. You know, various neighborhoods from my family's home city in Boston speak very differently about different things. Yeah. What is considered super rude outside of the 495 is just a normal way of saying hello. Yeah. So how do you decide? Well, those are the rules you train into the machine.
Okay, yeah.
Right, like we have a safety module that it may now be one of, but for a while it was the most deft in the industry, precisely because since we're dealing with emotion, we had an exceptional responsibility to make sure that you couldn't trick your way around it and get it to be awful to you in a way that would impact your own mental health or your own engagement with it. Yeah. You know, the version that people play with on a consumer level at Pi is optimized for continuing the conversation. Yeah. So it's emphatically not about like, you know, all rainbows and roses, because emotion is, I have this writer friend who talked about playing with the whole register. Yeah. You know, all 88 keys, if you will, of the keyboard. Okay. You know, but that's just the start, though. Yeah. Like we are learning things about the way that emotion plays out in workflows, in interactions. That there are no doubt professors who know, but we don't. One of the things that we set out to do when we rebooted the company a year ago was like, is there a standard out there? Mm-hmm. You know, much like the Hellish Swag, you know, benchmark, but for EQ, it doesn't exist. So we're working with a bunch of academics and other nonprofits to kind of come up with a third-party standard, because we don't want to say like, well, we think, you know. So yeah, I mean that's basically how we think of both why it is more emotionally astute, and again, it's because these professionals said this versus that is more emotionally astute. This is the range. And you can train these models to do all sorts of things if you have high quality data. And in our case, we had to create that data set.
So, okay, so my own personal thing, going away from the normal interview then. So I think one of my pet peeves, and when I listen to you, and I listen to a lot of stuff in the AI world, one of my questions is it seems like everything's trying to go to this AGI, this singularity.
What I would
call it. But I think one of the problems is there's this idea that everybody's the same. And so I wonder, even with your EQ model, is there too much emphasis on creating a model that will be good for everybody versus just frankly creating 1,000 different, like a Boston, this is for Boston people. Oh, you sound like you're from Boston? We're just gonna shunt you to the Boston model. Oh, you're from the Deep South? We're gonna shunt you to the Deep South model. Like, is there anything in your system that does that, or are you guys more for a unified?
No, there is, and also we're not the only ones that way. So to your point, so Sean, our CEO, often talks about kind of hyper-personalization, if you will, right? Like, you know, you can do a lot of things by cohort, and the ultimate limit of a cohort is you, but not just you in this moment versus you before coffee versus you after dinner. Your emotional state is really changing, and you want a model that speaks to you the way you need it to speak to you, and the way, especially in a relationship between you and a brand, or you and a company, or you and another colleague, or you and a team, it should be aware of all those particular things, right? I mean, imagine in a meeting where you have like a assistant that's sitting there like shepherding the conversation in a way that you have decided you want this conversation we're having to go. You know, like, hey, could you cut it a little shorter? Or hey, could you really speak to, but how does it know to be different for, you know, somebody from Dorchester versus somebody from Asheville? You train it to be. Right? And you're also posing, as you know, for your listeners, these questions of memory. Which are evolving. You know, there's a great work out of Google, out of Microsoft recently about how to expand some of that stuff. We're doing a ton of things about how to make sure that it like learns about you, but continues to not just be like, oh, you want to hear from me this way, so I'll just do that, because that's not useful. Like, it's not a parrot. And it is a bit magical. I mean, I see rightly the skeptical, like, but how could this be? And I have that feeling, honestly, maybe not daily anymore, but certainly weekly, which is like, that is the magical part of these giant, you know, gazillion rows and columns just doing math, but spitting out emotion, is when the data in is meant to be astute, so is the stuff that comes out.
But again, maybe it goes too deep. Again, is the emotion in
such a thing?
Is the emotion in something like a database? Because again, that's one big thing with AI or LLMs is, again, resource consumption. These LLMs are just burning. They're just burning the planet. And so, like when I put that information, is it some kind of hyperscale RAG system that's using your LLM, going to pull out specific information to do this? Or are you, because fine tuning is better than creating the model initially, but it still burns a lot of resources, right? I can't imagine you want to be fine tuning like every 3 hours.
No, and also the inference, inference remains to me maybe not the best term, but again, like to your point before about calling it AI, sometimes terms stick and then they are what they are.
Yeah.
So, the cost of inference. So for example, we've reduced the cost of even running our giant models inference, I think, by 5x over the last few months.
Really?
Just through a bunch of optimizations and learning how these systems work and how people are using it. Our largest model, it's not even in production right now, which is almost more than twice the size of the one that's in production. It's what they call a mixture of experts. So it doesn't hit all of it just to do 2 + 2. It knows how to pull up particular capabilities in order to do what's needed there. Inference had been, especially 2 years ago, very, very expensive just to say hello. Like infamously, Sam had the rounds of like, oh my gosh, we're burning tens of millions of dollars for people just saying please and thank you. On the other hand, you want people to say please and thank you, right? Because if they're rude to machines, it's a short matter before they're super rude to people, and that's not, we want to go the opposite way. We want your interactions with the machines to like not only elevate your ability to do work, but also elevate the way that you interact with other people. Because you appreciate them more. Maybe you see other dimensions of them you hadn't seen before, because you're dealing with these hyper-intelligent super agent machines. So you mentioned RAG before, and certainly in the enterprise context, there is a lot of stuff that it's useful to pull in things through RAG as a sort of glorified version of a prompt. It is the case that there is stuff sitting in data. There are things that are stored in the context window or in memory, which hits a certain ceiling, but the emotionality is in this almost alchemical, as Sean often calls it, like interactions between these giant probabilistic systems that are literally unlike anything before. My old boss, Jeff Bonfort, used to have this line about scale being like the difference between a supersonic aircraft and a subsonic. They look really similar. There's a little curving on like the Concorde, but otherwise they look like they're just planes, right? Except if you try to fly a subsonic aircraft north of the speed of sound, the wings are going to fall off, right? So it's sort of similar here, where NLP is like a subsonic aircraft. It does a lot of similar stuff. But the sound barrier is real, and the stuff that happens supersonically is just odd, right? Just like for aeronautical engineers in ways that I can't possibly speak to. But I could probably ask an LLM how they are, and invite anybody listening out there to do so yourself using deep research from Copilot or Gemini or GPT. We don't have a deep research capability in our thing because we're not chasing the AGI.
So with that too, so going back, listening to say, so the people you work with, so they created Pi, so that's the PHI. So that's Microsoft's model? Does Microsoft own it or created it, or God knows what?
So first of all, thank you for not asking the thing we used to get all the time last year and happily haven't really since the first of the year. Just didn't Microsoft buy you? No.
Oh, that was going to be the whole Pi thing.
But I get why, which is they invented a kind of new way to achieve business goals and to beef up their team that hadn't really, as far as I understand, it wasn't common before. It's happened a bunch of times since. Amazon did similarly with Adept, and there are a few others I can't remember the names of. So Microsoft licensed our code, a one-time license of the code as of that date. So it's evolved since then. Non-exclusive in order to add that to their own robust capabilities, which also included they have a license to the OpenAI code. So when I was at Microsoft a couple years ago, as we were ramping up towards the launch within Bing of this stuff, Microsoft has a lot of its own AI capabilities, especially around web grounding. I think it was either the very first to do it, or one of the first. It basically meant if you were asking a question about the internet, it would show you, like, I came to this conclusion because here's a website, you can go check it out for yourself.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a way to feel like you're not just being hallucinated at, or spoken imaginatively to. And then they invited Mustafa and whoever wanted to join him to go form a new unit reporting directly to Satya called the AI team.
Okay.
And so Mustafa became the CEO of the AI unit of Microsoft, and the vast majority of the original members of our company went with him. And then Reed, who had co-founded the company with Karen and with Mustafa, invited Sean to come in and be phase 2 CEO. Sean and I had done a startup together a decade ago doing SharePoint ML and computer vision. We pulled in Vibhu, who you met earlier, and apparently is going to be on the show later, who was a former CEO of Edmodo and early Google and ex-CMU professor, just brilliant technical leader. And Ted Sheldon, who had been doing a lot of the AI stuff at Bain, and we started ramping the team back up through a mixture of hiring and acquiring.
Okay.
It's a mixture of people.
So wait, this was a team at Microsoft?
No, here. So at Inflection. So we're a separate company.
Okay.
No relationship to Microsoft other than gratitude, and we're cheering from the distance. I myself use a Windows machine. I think I'm the only person in the company who does. But as the product guy, you'd expect me to walk in and use their shoes. And most people, as you know, in the enterprise, do not use a Mac. They use a Windows machine, and Copilot's right there. Some of the capabilities are very recognizable, like, oh yeah, that's probably Inflection code. And some is all stuff that they've evolved since. And some of it, like deep research, is like straight out of the GPT stuff. And again, no doubt advancements that they themselves have made, honestly, for obvious reasons, that'll keep up on exactly what they've done. But yeah, no, we're separate companies. We're often a different path, really.
So why, again, we're just riffing at this point, fuck it. So, again, being in the tech world for 30 years, one of the most obnoxious things is the level of competition for all these companies. Like they just try to kill each other for the hell of it. Again, it's the amazing thing about AI. What is it about AI that allows all these big tech companies to be like so incestuous? I've never seen these companies actually fucking like DNS. You guys don't know wins. Like fucking Microsoft tried to create their own goddamn DNS back in the day. But now they're using OpenAI and they're using you. Apple's using all the. It's like it's a kumbaya moment. Like what the hell?
It is so interesting you say DNS. Sean, our CEO, is gonna. I know exactly the look on his face when he sees this because he uses that analogy all the time. As people who've seen, the internet early on, he remembers when like you had a web server, and you did everything yourself, and then the internet got larger, and all of a sudden DNS came into being, and you had all these middle players, and like the stack evolved. I think it's a combination of a bunch of things, and I don't pretend to know all of them. The stuff that I've tracked, and I think this is super relevant for the moment we're in, where, did you ever hear people talking about MCP servers 12 months ago?
No, it was about 2 months ago.
It's like the clock began at the beginning of the year in a way.
Well, that was the thing, because like MCP came out, and I was like, I wonder how the other people are going to kneecap it. Like the first thing I thought was, I wonder what the kneecap is going to be. And then like everybody went, I was like, oh.
In fact, let's play that out and come back to some of your other examples there, because I think speaking to what's about to happen in the next 6 months. So, Anthropic was the originator of MCP. OpenAI says, well, we're going to support it too. Google's like, hey, but we had a purely decentralized model, A to A, but we're going to support MCP too, and overnight it becomes canonized as the paradigm now for these handshakes. Diego, who I think I mentioned before, the CPO over at Box, smarter on his worst days than I'm on my best days, had this line that he should be getting royalties on, how often I quote it, where MCP is the new soap.
You're saying,
it's the way these things handshake. Why does that matter? Because in the old world, exactly to your point, everything was zero sum. I need to get to use my sales software, my CRM software, my way of managing databases, or my way. Everything is changing so rapidly that all of us have an interest in moving the game forward. And of course, carving out like where do we play, but the old days of no, but this is what I do and only this, that's already over. And so the level of collaboration, to your point, I think is a function of how unique the tech is and how unique the moment is, and to your point, I think it speaks to everything we've known about the way software plays out in the enterprise is being rewritten. That doesn't mean that you throw it all away, but it means, for example, like, when you're take the Glean Workday scenario, right? So Glean's been around for a while, but did anybody hear about Glean until about a year ago?
No.
They did not. Why did they hear about it a year ago? Because, once you integrate it against enough apps, if you're fortunate, you will find that lift-off use case. Back to your point about the early days of YouTube, I mean, I remember being an alpha user of YouTube back in August 2005, and like nobody used it, and then the Chronicles of Narnia moment happened, in January of 2006, and MySpace was there, and then the game was already over, overnight. Yeah. So for Glean, of course, it was, at least from what I've heard, how many vacation days do I have in Workday without having to go to Workday?
Okay, yeah.
And that was it. All of a sudden people are like, oh, all that data that's locked up in all these other apps, I can actually just get at through search. Okay, well, if I can get at data through search, can I do things with that data? And then that combines with people trying to create intelligent agents using data in a secure way, which is why we focus so heavily about putting our inference on-prem and in virtual private clouds and all the rest, so that you can control your data. And then all of a sudden we're in a totally different world. So I think there is, of course, still some zero. I don't know any other GPT-4 class model like ours. There's like 8 of us now that spends as much time engaging with open source.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you're open, like Llama, I don't think they do much with the closed source players. And that again speaks to we play in a different level of stack than they do. Like we're not chasing the API. We don't have 300,000 GPUs. We don't care about having we put our, frankly, ample resources at the service of enterprises who are trying to transform the way that people do the work of creating value in those companies, especially around customer experiences, and often in terms of stuff inside, especially when it comes to their data.
So you keep bringing up open source though, because Llama isn't open source.
Not in the classical sense, you're absolutely right.
But it's not even that. Like, it was interesting is, because I've been hanging out with like the open source people in Raleigh, but it's like they talk about that where you don't know what data it was trained on. There's all this stuff, like, because open source used to be like Linux. Like you could literally just copy, paste, edit. And like they start talking about open source with models, and it's you get something, but could you actually recreate it?
So maybe to talk about open. So Sean was the R&D technology chief at Mozilla for many years, and he said many times that governance models are when it's like the old joke about first-time founder focuses on the experience only, second-time founder focuses on the distribution for the experience. Similarly, early open source projects, it's like it's open, it's there, but mature open source projects are about governance model. I was a stunt double on a TED AI panel a few months ago, where, to your point, in the old days, if you and I have the same code on a laptop, it's a question of time and ingenuity about can we build something better than the giant. Now, it's like, even if you had exactly all the hyperparameter weights, but you don't have the GPUs, or if you have the GPUs, but you don't have the 1.21 gigawatts to get the flex capacitor to work, how does that help? So, again, that's new. Like, these questions of access and equity and ability to participate in civil society are new because of the cost of this stuff. So, having said all that, like, look, it's not purely open, but then at the end of the day, Linus controlled the kernel too. So like, there's always a continuum. Llama is amazing in how it's changed the industry because of how open it is, even though it's not fully academically open. And the reason you hear such admiration from us around it is we've spent a lot of time tuning it and doing things from it that we've learned, and then some of that feeds back into our proprietary models and vice versa. We found bugs that probably nobody else, well, as far as we can tell, nobody else found because of our experience with our own models. Open source over time always wins, but not necessarily to the exclusion of closed. Otherwise, all the software we would all use would be all open. Sometimes there's reasons that you want a mixture of both.
So
big theme, and I'm glad you're raising it because it needs to be raised early and often because of how it's changing.
Well, I think that's my frustration is like with open source, because again, if you go back 20 years, open source was Linux. And what's curious now, like what's interesting, like with Amazon and Microsoft, is they're adding to these open source projects, but the implementations are to such a scale that I could never touch.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, okay, so we took this, but then what we added to it, you'll never be able to use because you're never going to have 10,000 servers. And so it's a curious,
yeah, exactly. To your point, it's like that moves it from an academic discussion of like purity level to like, but what is the result you're trying to? And I think that's useful because it focuses the conversation on like the effects as being influenced by multiple sources, not just whether or not it's open.
Wonder if there's be a new definition for like the next.
May said on stage in our panel earlier that synthetic data gets a bad rap because synthetic doesn't really characterize how important it is for augmenting the other, and also like you think of like rayon shirts instead of like bamboo, and I agree completely. Like all these terms. And to your point, I mean, the through line of this that's so interesting for me is to your point about words matter. Why are the words so sloppy? And it's people like yourself who will help shape them, right? Literally. So, like, I don't know if that responsibility weighs heavier or if it's more delightful, but I couldn't agree more.
Interesting. So then when you create your model, so what's interesting is like so many times we talk about these models, and we talk about, OpenAI or the big companies and doing something questionable. So apparently, if you're talking about really large models, so your models are at their scale. I don't know, how do you ask this? How have you figured out how to make your models unquestionably? Or is there a way to, because basically you're talking about like they're just scraping the entire internet and the whole
I don't know how they build theirs, so everybody builds their models differently. I think the key thing is first and foremost like answering questions about how you think about safety. Because once people are interacting with these things, and for us safety is like a very large theme. The whole reason that, again, before the Llama 405B model, for the insiders listening to us both, which I think was early October, maybe it was August, might have been August. We were already making the inroads to go on-prem because we're like, you as a company need to feel confident your data remains within, and that you can be confident that the models, plural, that you're using are going to be interacting with your teammates appropriately and not go off the rails. It's really hard, right? There's a lot of tradecraft that goes into how to make that stuff work, and as you can imagine, we believe probably even higher responsibility than most of our erstwhile peers, because once you touch emotion, like you're hitting close to home in an even more central way than telling me whether or not 2 + 2 = 5 or 22, depending, right? The short answer is none of these things are solved problems in all right, we're all done. Instead, it's like all the big players have made a huge amount of headway. The fact that there's this set of international agreements that everybody signs up for, like the Seoul Accords a year ago, in terms of making sure that we are holding ourselves, and to your point, because the industry does collaborate so much, to keep moving the bar, precisely because if you're going to put, it's not like anybody asked for AI, right? So if you're going to put dramatic technology out there in the world, do so in a way that uplifts human capabilities and potential. We're emphatically a read company, right? So the whole super agency spiel of his most recent book, and how it's like cognitive GPS is one of the analogies he uses, where just like GPS, which was a fortune to create, and was originally for the DoD, I think. Think of how much it changed for our lives. We wouldn't have Lyft and Uber. I wouldn't have been able to find my way to the center here by making this stuff available. To your point, even of how much is burned through, I know there are people working really hard on how to use these capabilities to find scientific solutions to all sorts of the most intractable parts of climate change. Microsoft in particular, obviously, they have the servers they put in the bathyspheres in the north, in the Arctic. And, I mentioned that our inference is like 5x more efficient than it was a year ago. There's that line out there from Google, from Nobel laureate Demis, right, about they saved, 1 billion years of PhD time with AlphaFold?
Oh, yeah, I heard something about that.
Right,
Yeah,
I mean, you know, this is where it really starts to matter, is like, can you shorten the path towards these breakthroughs, these unlock moments with AI, not only the very valuable and important unblocking of things we already know how to do, and AI can help. AI needs to be part of the solution.
That's fair. But I wonder with that though, like, so you're having, your models are at the scale of these other models. And again, they've run into problems. So I'm just wondering, like, where do you get your data, or if you can talk about, and especially you talk about like synthetic data, like how do you?
So most of the synthetic data, by the way, you do for the companies that you work with.
Okay.
And because it's really important that it's like, you know, purpose-built models is one way people sometimes talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
I know we talk about fine-tuned or post-trained, but the fact is, like, you want the tool or the suite of tools, the toolkit, for the tasks that make sense for your business and your teammates and your customers, whether they're consumers at the end or business customers. And so, you know, to your point, it requires a bunch of care and a bunch of collaboration in order to make sure that it moves forward correctly that way. In the 5 minutes we have, I want to make sure we answer some of the other questions that you have. We've covered a lot of ground, which has been really inspiring, honestly, and I love that we focused a lot on EQ because, one, that's our most distinctive capability. Again, there's only less than 10 or less than a dozen, depending on how you count Falcon, and how many new models come out of China at a peer level of like Qwen, obviously, and DeepSeek, but EQ really is where we came from at this level, and where we see huge untapped value creating potential with partners, not by imposing on them, because what do we know, but working together to figure out how can this be a new lever for your practitioners to transform customer experiences and work within the enterprise.
Fair enough. Let's see here, since we only got a couple more minutes. I guess one of the other things I was wondering about, so I was listening to your panel discussion, then you're talking about the different models, and you talk about Pi, and you're going through the models, and then you say Qwen, I'm like, fuck, I know that name. And then I did a Google search, it's like, oh yeah, I know why I know that name. So, again, not getting into politics, but practical politics. So Qwen is a model that was created by the Alibaba Group. And so the fact that you're just going up on stage and talking about dealing with Qwen, is that a good thing in the modern world, or? So again, back to this question of care, right? So I also mentioned on stage that we are the contributors of a lot of the 2 minutes. A lot of the. That's my 2 minutes warning. A lot of the GRPO capabilities in TorchTune came from our studying intensely, like literally every noon, once DeepSeek R1 dropped. One of their key innovations was GRPO, this new method for fine tuning much more efficiently, and like the way it plays with reward models, and so, you know. Science is about learning from each other. All science also has a social context. We don't deploy Qwen on site for people yet, but if enterprises are like, yeah, we're good with this because like, you know, we don't have any concerns about our data finding its way back to Alibaba. And Alibaba also, I mean, think of, you know, many people asked, why in the world is Facebook investing in Llama? Like, it's open source. What do they get out of it? And the answer is they move the field forward, which ultimately benefits. Think of what they did with MySQL back a couple decades ago, right? Oh, they didn't also. I didn't know they were into MySQL.
They were a huge contributor to that because they had so much data that they didn't want to be constrained by the capabilities of Oracle and the rest. And so I think it's one of those examples where, to your point, the motive force, even for Linux, is or Apache web servers, is the reason open gets so much momentum is it's not zero sum. I love that you raised that theme and how this moment feels different than that, and how you picked up on, thank you, the sort of global perspective of this learning. You know, Mistral is another great example. Like, you know, when they were on stage with NVIDIA at GTC a couple months back, like, they're a French company. and some other stuff is open. And so I think this stuff will evolve in ways that are new, that will harken back to some of the old, but will need some new rules to be written. And it'll be thanks to the questions that people like yourself are asking, and your listeners and viewers, to keep the dialogue going, because it's more important than ever that the public of which we're a part be engaged, rather than us saying, "Oh, here it is. What do you think?" Like, help shape it.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's maybe the a note to end on, unless you have one more.
Well, yeah, so I had all these questions. I don't know if we got to any. Right? We got to something. So I guess the final thing, so your buddy is wanting you to go. So is there any final spiel you want to give? 50% off for Inflection today? I don't know.
No, I mean, I think support your favorite YouTubers and podcasters, who again are an essential part of how we all shape the dialogue in which AI itself fits, because that's how all of us win. I mean, I think a key thing that you raised about the bad old days of zero sum towards a non-zero sum moment. I think that's where certainly our company and many of our peers and colleagues want to move towards, and it takes this kind of ongoing dialogue. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being.